I'm Ed O'Keefe, CBS News in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Former President Donald Trump, defiant and angry Tuesday night in New Jersey after a historic court appearance earlier in the day in Miami. He called the indictment a political persecution. The former president pleaded not guilty to 37 felony counts at the federal courthouse in Miami. He is accused of mishandling classified documents and attempting to block the Justice Department's attempts to get them back. For more on this, we're joined by Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett, Congressional Correspondent Scott MacFarlane, who was inside the courtroom in Miami today, and Political Director Finn Gomez. Major, let's go to you first. The anger, the defiance, the lack of factual information conveyed by the former president, typical at moments like this of maximum sort of pressure and anger that he faces. But ultimately, this may result in yet more political benefit, sustaining his frontrunner status, and potentially raising millions of dollars off this indictment.
Yes, a couple of things, Ed. Just a second ago, the audience spontaneously saying happy birthday to the former president. His birthday will be tomorrow, June 14th. Audience very enthusiastic in response to a couple of things the president is asserting. One, that he had absolute authority under the Presidential Records Act to have all the documents that he had, and suggesting that he had declassified them, though there is no evidence that he went through any formal or informal process to do exactly that. And then a long litany of descriptions about things that Hillary Clinton did, that Vice President Joe Biden did when he was vice president or as a senator, all, he says, unprosecuted. And he is, therefore, in his expression here tonight, the victim of a political persecution. This crowd is receptive, as I said. And this is a lengthy and sometimes factually problematic assertion, not only about what his conduct was, but the conduct of those he is attacking in a political context. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Vice President Biden and then Senator Biden. And as you're hearing over my shoulder, there is a kind of vaudevillian call and response to mentions of either James Comey, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, etc. This is the political part two of a day-long drama, one that first played out in a strictly legal context in Miami, but is now here in Bedminster playing pure politics.
And both you and Finn had reported that there were plans tonight to raise up to $2 million off of this. So clearly the campaign continues on and anticipates reaping considerable financial advantage after yet another day in court.
Worth pointing out, it's a pre-scheduled fundraiser that has now become part fundraiser, part rally, and part expression of grievance. All three commingling together quite tightly here in the evening outside in Bedminster. And the $2 million is a goal. We'll see. It's not a huge amount of money. And as Finn Gomez well knows, as you well know, Ed O'Keefe, fundraising for the Trump campaign has several purposes. One political, one legal. He's got to pay his legal team. The Republican National Committee no longer pays former President Trump's legal bills. He's got to do that himself. So fundraising here, in some respects, is for the campaign, but it's also a pass-through to a large and ever-growing team of lawyers.
And we should point out, for the sake of context, that most other Republican contenders are also fundraising this week, as is the sitting president later in the week and next week as they near the end of the month and are coincidentally using this week to raise money for their ongoing campaigns. Finn, in Miami, we heard several 2024 candidates in the last 24 to 36 hours show openness to criticizing the former president, most notably now Tuesday night, the Wall Street Journal editorial board publishing part of an interview with former Vice President Mike Pence, who now is raising concerns about what's alleged, in addition to Nikki Haley, the former UN ambassador and South Carolina governor, who quite notably stuck her neck out on Monday by suggesting she had concerns about this, in part because people like her own husband, who are in the military, are being deployed, and him holding on to these documents could have put them and military operations at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think is also notable, Ed, is that, Bedminster was also cited twice in the 37-page indictment. It was cited when Trump showed a Pentagon plan of attack to someone who did not have that clearance. and also when he shared other classified information. So I think it's notable that this is where the day ends, right? This is where now candidate Trump is now speaking to his faithful and is now also focusing on raising funds for his campaign and, as Major noted, for his legal funds. But it is notable. It is notable, and I think part of that, Ed, is also because of our own CBS News polling that came out just a few days ago, and also new polling today that shows that he still has this dominant position in this early stage in the Republican primary race. 30 to 40 points, not just in our poll, but in other polls, the ABC poll, that shows that, you know, if you're a rival in this race, now is the time to contrast. One of those issues that could possibly be, and I think some see this, especially Chris Christie and others who have that national security background, but that Achilles heel could be national security. And the fact that he was showing, classified maps, the fact that he's showing a plan of attack and other classified information that dealt with national security in such a cavalier way, allegedly, I think that does raise some concerns, not just among this Republican field that was for the last few months pretty timid, not so vocal and critical towards the former president, but also to some perhaps in the Republican electorate. So it'd be interesting to see in the coming weeks how that is handled and how that is approached by others, including Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who's going to be heading to Nevada for the first time this weekend.
And in fact, DeSantis plus today, former House Speaker Paul Ryan on CBS Mornings making the general election electability argument that if winning the primary is one thing, but he can't seem to find general election support sufficient enough to win back the White House. So we'll see. Scott McFarland, also there up high on a Miami balcony for us tonight, has had a heck of a day. He learned to appreciate today why the NBA team is named the Miami Heat, because he was out running in it today for us to give us a sense of what was going on in the courtroom. Take us back inside the federal courthouse. Remind us how it went and what stuck out to you as sort of the more dramatic or unique moments of what you witnessed.
There was so much symmetry, Ed, between Donald Trump's mannerisms and disposition in the courtroom here today as what we saw in the courtroom in Manhattan. Largely expressionless in his face, hunched over at the shoulders, leaning over the defense table, his arms crossed, infrequently speaking with the attorneys on either side of him, and infrequently using the papers in front of him to jot down notes. He, as he walked out of the courtroom, was watched at every moment by the man sitting about 15 feet away. The special counsel, Jack Smith, was in the front row of this courtroom and eagle-eyed Trump as Trump walked out. It was about a 45-minute proceeding. Former president formally pleaded not guilty. Then we heard the release conditions, and they are remarkably light for the former president. He can still travel the world, doesn't surrender his passport, can travel throughout the country, travel internationally. The domestic travel is pretty important if you're running for the Republican nomination for president, and there's no bond money to put forward. He has an assured bond. Didn't even get a mugshot, Ed, because the marshals told us he's a pretty recognizable guy. There are a few photos of Donald Trump out there just in case law enforcement needs a reference later in this case. He had digital fingerprinting done. He was formally booked, that's the phrase, and he did meet with his new pretrial services officer. It was a hushed courtroom, pretty big, rather regal courtroom, the ceremonial courtroom here at the federal courthouse in Miami. There is a chance this case, if it goes to trial, could have its trial right here in Miami, far and away the largest and most secure complex the federal court system has in this southern district of Florida. And we learned in court today that this case is still headed for Judge Eileen Cannon, the Trump-nominated judge who sits in the West Palm Beach and Fort Pierce areas of the southern district of Florida. And yeah, Donald Trump has an official criminal case number, 23-CR 80101. He is a federal criminal defendant, clearly historical times, Ed. He is a U.S. president, a former president accused of a crime against the U.S.
And there is some unfinished business from the proceedings today, and we don't know yet when they'll be resolved. Among them, some kind of a deal regarding who exactly the former president can be speaking to, who happens to be on his payroll, and then issues related to Will Nada, the valet who served in the Navy, served him at the White House and now works for him as his personal aide. Remind us what we're waiting to learn about all that.
Let's take them in order, Ed. First of all, there are going to be some restrictions on the number of people or some of the people with whom Donald Trump can speak about this case. Mind you, he is speaking to a live television feed about this case right now, but the court is going to order a certain number of possible witnesses, potentially his employees, potentially Secret Service agents, potentially his co-defendant, with whom he cannot talk about the case. That is a court order. It is not a recommendation. He will be required to honor it. That will likely be litigated. So much of what happens in this case is likely to be litigated, which is one reason why it's difficult to get our hands on what the possible timetable is here. They didn't even schedule the next official hearing in this case today. Could be weeks, could be months, could be here in Miami, could be elsewhere. And the other matter you referenced, which is Nada himself. He was not arraigned as scheduled today because he has not yet secured Southern District of Florida certified counsel, an attorney who is free to do business here. He has an attorney from out of town right now. Some of this did pop up on short notice. They didn't realize potentially that he'd be charged in the Southern District of Florida, maybe as late as last Thursday till they got that news. The former president had an 11th hour addition to his legal team to make sure he had local counsel here today so that he could be arraigned. And it's likely Nada will be formally arraigned in the next couple of weeks. He might not have to make the trip back here. They may be able to do it virtually.
Finn, you are not only our political director now, you used to cover the White House and you used to cover South Florida. I have one question that was percolating here in D.C. that you might be able to help us with. All of what transpired today, the motorcades in Miami and back to his home in New Jersey, the security around the courthouse for him and for others gathered, that was all taxpayer funded, right?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
So, and the only
as
real,
it often is, yeah.
Yeah, the only personal expense he would potentially have today was for the jet fuel and for the event he's hosting at his home tonight, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you know, and ostensibly paid for by his campaign or his super PAC. But yeah, that is primarily taxpayer funded, correct?
Right. And
yeah.
I mean, it's not every day that a former president gets like street closure, motorcade length transportation around a major American city. But in this case, at least, given the security precautions, they opted to do that, right?
That's correct. And, you know, and on a number of different levels, I feel that we have seen unprecedented actions, maneuvers, just overall. I mean, if you think about it, you know, we obviously had this is just an historic indictment. This is an historic day, an infamously historic day, if you want to describe it that way. But also that level of security, that level of sort of pomp and circumstance, if you will. I mean, that we have typically not seen that. Unless it is for a sitting president. So, yes, all of it is uncharted and a bit atypical.
Yeah, it's worth noting that. Major Garrett, as we close this out, back to you in New Jersey, what does the former president do next politically after this? Do we have any sense of whether there's campaign stops scheduled or other moves to be made on the campaign trail?
I will defer to Finn on the next scheduled appearances of the former president, but you can be certain that there will be more rallies and events, North Carolina, South Carolina, Iowa, maybe not in that order, but in the not too distant future. But one thing I want to make sure that the audience understands, just a few moments ago, former President Trump here in Bedminster said that for 7 years, the United States government has exercised a campaign, these are his words, of psychological warfare against the United States, using disinformation to paint him as something less than he is. That's what he just said, that for 7 years he has been the victim of a U.S. government psychological warfare campaign.
To be continued. Chief Washington Correspondent Major Garrett in Bedminster, New Jersey. Congressional Correspondent Scott McFarland and Political Director Finn Gomez in Miami. Thank you to you guys, to your teams who've been with you all day. Great to be alongside you for another historic day of legal and political coverage in America. We thank you. Special Counsel Jack Smith has pledged a speedy trial for Donald Trump. Next, we look at what to expect as the proceedings move forward. We're streaming America Decides.
My office will seek a speedy trial in this matter, consistent with the public interest and the rights of the accused.
Welcome back to CBS News, continuing coverage of the indictment of Donald J. Trump. This is America Decides, and that was Special Counsel Jack Smith, who, of course, is overseeing the federal cases against former President Trump. Let's now bring in our CBS News legal analyst, Ricky Kleeman, who's in New York. Ricky, he was referred to repeatedly in court as the former president, not as Mr. Trump, not as the defendant. He was allowed to keep his passport. He's got unfettered access to the world with no travel restrictions. They're working out, apparently, a plan for who exactly he can speak to on a regular basis regarding the case and other matters. And we still don't know when exactly this is going to reconvene or proceed. What do you make of how it all played out today in Miami?
I think that we have to remember that arraignments are really pretty perfunctory. The purpose of an arraignment is to apprise the defendant of the charges and for him to enter a not guilty plea, which was done by his attorney. In terms of having restrictions in terms of his travel or surrendering his passport, I didn't expect any of that to occur in any event. He's campaigning to become the next president of the United States. Addressing him as former President Trump versus Mr. Trump versus the defendant, you can never tell what a judge can do, and obviously this magistrate decided to show him respect, and he's entitled to respect. We have to remember that he is presumed innocent at this point, and up and until any point where a jury might convict him. But I do want to talk, Ed, about that condition having to do with witnesses.
Yeah.
I think that there are two things here. Number one is many of these people who may be witnesses may be his employees. So he may have to deal with them on a regular basis, but they're not necessarily people who are close to him. So, of course, he's going to be able to talk to them, but he's being told he should not talk to them about the case. I don't have any problems with that, and that's not necessarily unusual. The problem, which I know if I were representing him, and I expect that his lawyers who are representing him will have to consider, as well as whoever is the local counsel and Mr. Nauta's current counsel have to consider, is to bring a motion about the order that says that Mr. Nauta and Donald Trump cannot speak about the case. It is traditional, it has been approved, that joint defendants can have a joint defense agreement. These two defendants are charged as co-conspirators. Their lawyers must communicate with each other. Their lawyers need to exchange information and see how they are going to go after the government's case together. It is unrealistic for their lawyers not to be able to talk. And now we look to the order going to Donald Trump and to the defendant, Mr. Nauta. This is his valet, for heaven's sake. They are together all the time. He was his body man when Donald Trump was president. That's about as close as any two people can be. The idea, it just seems to me, Ed, that the lawyers are going to appeal that ruling and that these two defendants will ask to be able to talk about the case.
And those kinds of motions are the kind that could slow down Jack Smith's public vow for a speedy trial, right? I mean, This is the way it can be delayed, is by throwing all these motions out there, drag it out beyond the 24 election, or just drag it out as long as necessary in hopes that the prosecution buckles.
Well, yes and no. Yes, they will create a delay, but we also have to remember that that's a very legitimate motion, as will be their motions to dismiss. It's not that we should think that they are filing a motion to dismiss or a motion to exclude the testimony of Donald Trump's prior lawyer, where the judge broke the crime fraud exception and allowed that lawyer's testimony to go before the grand jury. That's a very viable motion. So there's one thing to think that lawyers might do things to have frivolous delays. These are not frivolous motions.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, I wanted our viewers to hear from a woman named Alina Habba, who is the former president's attorney and spokeswoman. She spoke earlier today with our senior investigative correspondent, Catherine Herridge, a bit about the potential legal strategy. Take a look, and then we'll talk about it.
How does the Trump legal team plan to fight these charges?
Well, that's privileged. And obviously our fight is our fight, and it'll come out, in light soon. I think the American people need to remember one thing, though. An indictment reads like a story, which is not typical for an indictment like this, because they want to tell the story. We saw Special Prosecutor Jack Smith stand up and say that every American person should read this and spend the time reading it. Well, of course you want that. Number one, you'll taint a jury pool. Number two, it's the story you wanted for election interference. And we haven't told our side of the story yet, and everything has context, and everything, has to be told both sides. And we're looking forward to doing that.
She seems to signal, Ricky, that there could be holes in the indictment. Do you see any that they might be able to exploit?
No. I think, frankly, that the indictment is solid. That doesn't mean that they won't try with appropriate motions, as I say, to exclude Evan Corcoran's, his prior lawyer's testimony. And it doesn't mean that they won't attack the indictment itself. I do differ with Alina Habba on one thing. This is a speaking indictment. It's a federal court. This is not unusual to have a long narrative. I've seen it countless times during my practice and during my work as a legal analyst. The federal government can do this, and it's what they do often very well. So I do differ with her about that. We know this case will be fought on motions to dismiss, not on the facts.
Yeah, and this reporter can add, in what little legal work he's done compared to you, that yes, the federal government often writes well-written indictments just like this in all kinds of cases. It is not unique. What is unique, however, is the case and all of it that comes with it around the former president. And Ricky, we're glad you're here for the legal analysis.
Great to be with you.
All right, we'll talk soon. As former President Trump faces legal trouble, polling continues to show he's still far ahead of the 2024 GOP field. How the classified documents case could affect the presidential race. We're streaming America Decides. The unprecedented court appearance marked the first time a former president faced federal arraignment. CBS's Catherine Herridge looks at how the case will be a test for both the prosecution and the defense.
This historic prosecution of a former president presents unique legal arguments and challenges. While special counsel Jack Smith has a recording where Trump allegedly admits keeping a classified Pentagon memo on Iran, Trump's legal team insists he had broad powers to declassify and keep sensitive records like that one.
Remember, President Trump was the president. He could declassify documents under the Presidential Records Act.
But the National Archives disputes that, saying all records must be returned at the end of an administration. Alina Habba, a Trump lawyer and spokesperson, told CBS News the legal team may move quickly to dismiss the case, citing alleged prosecutorial misconduct, and they are ready to fight each of the 37 criminal counts.
These are bogus charges made by a politically motivated special prosecutor.
Does the former president understand the serious nature of these criminal charges?
Of course.
Calling the indictment a one-sided story, Trump lawyers are also expected to demand notes from former Trump attorney Evan Corcoran be thrown out of the case. Corcoran's personal notes quote Trump asking, "What happens if we don't respond at all or don't play ball with them?" That was in response to the government subpoena demanding the documents be returned.
I think that the testimony of Evan Corcoran is something that will be suppressed.
For special counsel Jack Smith, he'll be dealing with a jury made up of Florida residents, a state Trump won in 2016 and 2020. And the heart of the case, the retention of classified documents will create obstacles for prosecutors.
The government really has to develop a strategy to use the classified documents without making them public.
The judge overseeing the case could also present hurdles. Eileen Cannon, a Trump appointee, slowed the FBI's investigation into the documents last summer. Smith will also likely have to deal with repeated attacks from Donald Trump.
Deranged Jack Smith, and he's a big Trump hater.
Smith is described by colleagues as stoic and unflappable. In the past, he's handled politically sensitive investigations and charged high-profile Democrats. Ed?
Catherine Herridge, thank you. Former President Trump's appearance in a federal court in Miami was historic. He is, after all, the first former president to face a judge over federal charges. CBS News chief political analyst John Dickerson joins us now. He, of course, also the host of Primetime with John Dickerson on this very network. John, you've written you've written a few books on the history of the presidency and campaigning for president, so what better person to talk to than you? In the history of the presidency, are there any moments that mirror what's happening right now to Donald Trump?
No, I mean, nothing close. And that's not just because it's the first former president to have a federal indictment. But it's also because what usually has happened, I mean, the closest analog would be Richard Nixon. And the story of Richard Nixon's departure, it was when his party abandoned him. When it got too hot, when that smoking gun tape was found, and the senior members of his party, including Senator Barry Goldwater, went to him and said, "You've lost my vote." We've seen that kind of political adhesion before to presidents during impeachments and that kind of thing. But this is now a president who's not in office. They don't have to reelect former President Trump, but he has the adhesion of his party as if he were an incumbent facing impeachment, and they're going to do everything they can to hold on to the office. So it's both the fact that this has never happened before in history, but also the fact that you have that political adhesion taking place for somebody who's not actually currently in office.
You know, imagine a senator coming to him now saying, "You've lost my vote," and Trump would probably tell him, "Go stick it where the sun don't shine," or something. So yes, that speaks to how things have changed so much. You know, our new poll out this week shows 62% of Republican voters think the former president could beat the current president, Joe Biden, in 2024. There appears to be nothing really breaking his popularity with the party at all, does there?
No, I mean, the numbers inside of that poll in all the different ways, you know, that you look at. I mean, you imagine if there were a question where you polled people who said they didn't want a president named Donald, that he would be leading in that group of voters as well. He has pretty much across the board strength, and it's impervious to all the slings and arrows he's faced, but also to things like when you ask voters, what do you want the candidates to talk about? He's not talking about any of those things, and yet he is the far and away top choice. He's also the top choice of those who are considering other candidates. And this appears to only strengthen him in terms of being attacked by a system that our poll shows most Republican primary voters see as one that's out to get him and that is politically motivated, even though the facts of the case might not support that view.
And yet, quickly, former House Speaker Paul Ryan earlier today on CBS Mornings said the former president's not electable. I mean, so even if Republicans support him, Ryan is reminding at least his party they face a real challenge in that general election, right?
The tighter the party clings to former President Trump, the more it makes it likely they will elect somebody who has vulnerabilities in the general election. He lost in 2020. His candidates didn't do very well in 2022. And if you look at the indictment as a political document, not a legal one, it gives you a window into how a president would handle the most sensitive aspects of U.S. national security. And then the voters have to decide, do they want to do that again? Do they want to have that same person with those most sensitive elements of U.S. national security for 4 more years? That's a tough argument in a general election. But that's not the election that Republicans are wrestling with right now.
No, it's not. John Dickerson there in Miami. We thank you for your historical perspective. We'll talk to you soon. Up next, more on the classified documents that led to Trump's arraignment. I'll speak with a former Inspector General of the intelligence community about the significance of these documents after the break. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Former President Trump surrendered to authorities in a Miami courthouse this afternoon to be arraigned in the classified documents case. Our next guest knows a thing or two about this subject. Charles McCullough is a former Inspector General of the intelligence community, or their big watchdog in essence, a former FBI special agent as well, and a current partner at Compass Rose Legal Group, PLLC. Good to see you. Thank you for being here on a day like today, because you have unique insight and experience into what's going on here, and especially the content of the material that he was alleged to have been mishandling down at Mar-a-Lago. What type of information, remind us, was in these classified or top secret documents that caused so much alarm for the intelligence community?
Well, things are classified based upon the possibility that if they're released, there's possible harm to the government. So these were documents, anything that is secret, top secret, or above top secret SCI is going to possibly cause harm to the national security if it's released. So these were all national defense documents, DOD documents. There's been reports of military plans in there that these documents were clearly classified.
And we remember that there was at least one person who was alleged to be a Chinese official who had gotten onto the campus there in Palm Beach. And so there was concern that foreign nationals may have been trying to find this information and get to it. That's part of the big concern here, obviously.
That's the concern altogether with classified documents, is that you need to keep them in a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility. That's the way they're stored. And they weren't. They were down there in boxes. Now, if in the former president's defense, there's no report, I don't believe, that there was an actual compromise here.
Exactly.
But certainly there was the possibility of compromise, and that's what everyone worries about.
Right. And who knows, over the course of this, it may be revealed that somebody did try. Certainly if they have as much documentation and imagery of where it was, one wonders if they saw who was being able to get to it.
Well, and that's what you do a damage assessment for. And someone should be, or probably has already done that, either the ODNI or the FBI, but that is what you look at. And you may never know whether or not there's actually been a compromise.
Right.
Is the problem.
Part of the reason why I'm glad you're here is because you had involvement in the classified information issue around Hillary Clinton as well.
I did.
And this, of course, is now the big political argument, at least. Well, she did it with her computer in her house in the Hudson Valley in New York. She didn't get charged. How's that any different from what he's up to in Florida and alleged to have done?
There are parallels here. There's no denying that. And I think it appears to be disparate treatment until you consider that prosecutorial discretion is exercised on a case-by-case basis. So you have to look at each case individually. Mrs. Clinton didn't get prosecuted. Mr. Trump is indicted. But that's not really going to help his defense. That'll help him politically, that argument. But the legal defense saying that she did it too and she didn't get in trouble isn't really going to be of a whole lot of merit to him legally in a federal courtroom.
Yeah. And remind us, it was that you helped discover that she had it?
Right. I was the Intelligence Community Inspector General at the time, and my office initially discovered the documents and did the analysis. And then we worked in conjunction with the FBI.
And I mean, and this is part of what they allege, is that, well, she didn't hand it over either. They were trying to destroy all of her materials. When they broadly say that, his supporters. Is that true?
There is ample evidence of obstructive behavior in the Clinton case. When you hear people talking about SIM cards and hammers and programs like BleachBit, there is certainly ample evidence of that. But again, that's not really going to help the former president in his plight right now. I don't see, as a legal matter, how what about her-ism really helps him at this point.
Right, and that's important, I think, for everybody to remember as this goes forward. There will be the legal arguments made in a courtroom.
Exactly.
The political argument we see on television or on the stump is separate and divorced from all that, and ultimately focus on the legal fight, because that's what he faces.
That's correct.
All right. Charles McCullough, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Ed.
2024 candidates are already reacting to Donald Trump's arraignment, what his rivals are saying, and how his case could shake up the race for the Republican nomination. That's next as you're streaming America Decides.
You like Donald Trump or you don't like Donald Trump. This conduct is inexcusable, in my opinion, for somebody who wants to be president of the United States.
If this indictment is true, if what it says is actually the case, President Trump was incredibly reckless with our national security.
Welcome back to America Decides. While the majority of Republicans continue to defend Donald Trump, several 2024 competitors have shown new openness to at least criticize him a bit. Maura Gillespie and Joel Payne join us now. Maura is the founder of Blue Stack Strategies and previously served as an advisor to former Republican House Speaker John Boehner and former Illinois Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Joel, a Democratic strategist, as well as a CBS News political contributor and the chief communications officer for Move On. Great to have you both here. I want to start with something that former House Speaker Paul Ryan said earlier today on CBS Mornings, because this reporter at least believes that's kind of where all of this is headed. Let's just take a listen to what he said.
I've been a never again Trumper for some time now.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not a Trump fan. I want to win, and if we nominate Trump, we're going to lose. He hasn't won anything since 2016.
Mm-hmm.
We lost the House in 18. We lost the presidency in 20. We've lost the Senate. We would have won the Senate this time in 22 had it not been for Trump and his nominees in some of our key primary elections.
Is he wrong, Maura?
No. I mean, that's really the problem here, is that the Republican Party cannot afford another 2020 Trump, let alone what he's done in the previous or past elections. So if we want to win, which I would assume Republicans want to win, they need to pick somebody else.
Yeah. I mean, it is notable that despite all that, he continues to enjoy sustained support. I think the one notable shift this week probably came from Nikki Haley, who on Monday at least signaled that she has real concerns now with the substance of the accusations against him, calling out concerns about national security, the fact that her husband's deploying as part of the South Carolina National Guard to Africa for about a year or for several months shortly. Is she seeing something now that the others may pick up on, or is she perhaps just trying to create a new lane for herself, given that, you know, there's a chance to score headlines this week if you express criticism for him as a Republican?
I think something people did, which I would say was maybe not the best approach, was immediately after Trump announced on Truth Social that this was happening, people put out statements for and against without having read the details of the indictment. Take a beat, take a minute. Honestly, what Vice President Pence did was saying, let's read the details of this indictment so we know exactly what he's being charged with. So if they had just taken a minute to wait to respond and set out statements, she could have gone out with this approach and and she is on her own lane right now, but I think more will follow. I just wish that people had waited to chime in until they had the details.
Yeah. And Joel, White House on Tuesday, at least, the president had meetings with the Secretary General of NATO. They popped a surprise meeting, apparently, with the president of Uruguay. He was hosting a Juneteenth concert. They're trying to keep him almost completely out of the news, sort of in a push to sort of have the American public almost forget that he exists until next year when he faces whoever the Republican is. I mean, this keep the head down, ignore it as much as possible strategy. Do you think it's working, or does he need to say more?
I do. I think it's working. One, I think it is true to what Joe Biden's promises to the American people, that he's going to support an independent judiciary. But also, I think it's a part of his political superpower to kind of be above it all, to be able, as I like to say, Joe Biden, he can have a conversation with any American. He could be welcome at any dinner table. They might not agree with him, but he's welcome there, and that's a superpower. But to me, Ed, the big question here is, does political gravity still apply? Okay. Does political gravity apply to Donald Trump, to the Republican 2024 primary field? Typically, a candidate with this much baggage is eventually, particularly peaking this early, is not going to be able to last throughout the entire primary campaign without having somebody else chase them. Does political gravity still apply? And I think that's what we're all kind of trying to figure out. And even me, as someone who's not a Republican, just a political observer, I'm trying to figure out, does political gravity still apply? Because also, Donald Trump has been in front of the American people a lot, not just as an indicted former president, but just as a political candidate. Right. There's a fatigue that comes with that.
Maura, we have seen sustained support for Trump among congressional leadership, most especially in the House. There's some in the Senate, but much less so. In fact, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, again, refusing on Tuesday to discuss this at all. What could potentially tip the scales against the former president there with his congressional supporters?
Right, and you're seeing a lot of senators who are openly endorsing other candidates and that are not Donald Trump. So my hope is that it does inspire some congressional Republicans to chime in and say, you know what, we don't want to keep losing. And that's the narrative that Paul Ryan mentioned, but I know that Ron DeSantis has mentioned. Trump is losing, and we are losing because of Trump. So hopefully that they see that narrative and realize it could impact their congressional races, and to get behind a different candidate that could actually win. So that'll be an important part of looking ahead to 2024 and beyond.
Does complacency set in with Democrats as this continues to play out?
I'm not sure if complacency sets in. I think Democrats feel good about what they're going to go to the American people with. And I know I'm not here to talk about Republicans, but I did talk to a Republican on one of the 2024 campaigns, and they said they're in a kind of wait and see approach. And I do think that while I appreciate that, and I understand it as someone who's worked on 2 presidential campaigns myself, what are you waiting for? Like, now's the time to go for the jugular for Trump. He's weakened now. And that would be my advice to someone who's worked on a couple of these campaigns. You got to go for the jugular. You can't be reactive when it comes to Donald Trump. You got to be proactive.
It might be what Nikki Haley's up to. We'll see if it reflects it all in the numbers at all in the coming days. Thank you both for being here, Maura Gillespie and Joel Payne. We appreciate it. That does it for now. We'll be right back with more on America Decides, and we'll see you again at 9 p.m. Eastern for the very latest. You're streaming CBS News.